Kim, Ron, and Rufus chowed down on the large plate of nachos inside Kim's coop as they reflected on everything Dr. Director had told them back at Global Justice HQ. While they agreed not to let their affect their personal lives, Kim and Ron both admitted that they should still keep their eyes and ears open at all times and avoid making any mention of Ridley or the Black Shadow organization in public. If there was a chance that an unseen former found out that Kim and Ron knew, they'd be in considerable danger. You think it's safe for Wade to know about the Black Shadow organization? We could tell him everything Dr. Director told us, Ron suggested. No, not unless she tells us to, Kim replied firmly. Well, we did send him copies of the files to that flash drive, so Wade might need to figure that out at some point, Ron said. Maybe so, but I don't want to say anything to Wade until I'm sure that it's safe, Kim insisted. We don't want the Black Shadow catching on to him, and if he starts digging too deep for answers, they are more powerful as Gemini claim they are. They might have hackers online watching for everyone to track him down. Good point, Ron said. I hadn't considered that possibility until now. As Kim was about to respond, her communicator beeped. She quickly picked it up and saw that it was Wade calling her. Hey Wade, what's the sitch? Kim asked. Well, hey Kim, I've been viewing some files in the flash drive you and Ron found at Dementor's place, and I found some pretty serious stuff on it, Wade informed. Kim then became concerned upon hearing that, and so did Kim and Ron. Was there anything linked to Duff and Dementor's killers? Kim asked, not wanting to bring up Ridley and his organization. I think I have found someone of interest who really seems like a big shot, Wade replied. I found someone in clients for the folder who apparently hired Dementor for a lot of past jobs involving trafficking stolen goods like money and gold and even weapons. He's on top of the list, and get this, he hired Dementor like 170 times in the past. It took me a while to read all the 170 lists of jobs Dementor had performed for this guy in the past, and some of them are a bit disturbing. 170? Man, that's a lot of jobs, Ron exclaimed in surprise. Who is this person that hired Dementor for all these jobs? What Wade said next made Kim's and Ron's hearts skip a beat. Some guy named Ridley Farkas. No idea who he is, but he sounds like trouble to me, Wade replied. Kim and Ron just glanced at each other with shocked expressions, and even Rufus looked unsettled by what he just heard. Oh no, are you sure that's who he is? Kim asked with great concern. Yeah, I don't know who this Ridley Farkas is, and I can't seem to find anything on him. It's like he's a ghost, Wade replied. Well, we do, Ron said. Dr. Director interrogated Gemini back at Global Justice HQ, and he told her some very disturbing stuff about this Ridley guy. Wait, you know who he is? Wade asked, not expecting to hear what Ron just said. Yeah, Dr. Director said that Ridley is apparently the leader of some evil crime organization named Black Shadow, Ron replied. Black Shadow? Sounds almost like WEE, Wade replied. No, it's far worse from what Dr. Director described, Kim replied. Both Kim and Ron before began explaining that everything Dr. Director had told them earlier, not leaving out any details. Wade made sure the communicator was secure to ensure the call couldn't be tracked or spied on by unsuspecting eyes. He took in every word spoken to him. When Kim and Ron finally finished giving Wade all the details, he looked shocked, surprised, and unnerved. No way, Wade said and exclaimed in shock. Are you two serious? Tell me you two are not lying about this whole part of the informers. I wish we were, but it's true. Or at least that's what Dr. Director suspects, Kim replied. Until we could find out more about this Ridley, there's no really way of knowing. Well, like I said, I can't find anything on this Ridley Farkas, Wade said. I searched up on police records on various other criminal archives in hopes of finding out anything on him, but there weren't any. So there was also no birth records, medical records, or anything else that Ridley has either. It's like he doesn't exist. Well, he obviously does, so why isn't there any records of him at the police archives? Ron wondered. I don't know, Wade replied in disappointment. But if I had to guess, I'd say they probably erased it from the record. No doubt Ridley himself. If he and his organization really are just as powerful as Gemini claims to be, then it wouldn't be such a big surprise that Ridley would try and erase all of his criminal record history. But that's not what's concerning me. What is it? Ron asked curiously. Why would Ridley delete all of his records of existence? That's one thing I can't figure out, Wade pondered, tapping his head in confusion. Actually, there may be a reason for that, Ron interjected. Ridley probably did it to hide himself from the world. By being rid of every one of his life records and criminal records, Ridley basically erased himself from existence. So as far as the world's concerned, it's like he doesn't exist. Makes perfect sense, since no one would ever suspect Ridley of being a suspect in crime he commits in the shadows. You can't suspect someone who doesn't exist for committing a crime, Kim concluded. Catching a criminal kingpin would be no records of existence would pretty much be next to impossible. There's gotta be some way we could find this guy. Maybe since there's no record of existence, finding him easily will be a total shot in the dark, Ron said with frustration sighed. Wade's eyes widened. Then he said, Dark? That's it. What's it? Kim asked in confusion. Maybe there's no record of Ridley's existence on the surface web. Maybe I might have better luck on finding some info from the dark web from him, Wade replied. The dark web? I'm not sure that place is safe, Ron worriedly said. I heard that the dark web is a pretty sinister part of the internet. Yes, it can be, Wade nodded. But if you have the proper IP protection software and you know how to navigate through the dark web like I do, you should be fine. But yeah, you'll still have to be careful since the dark web has a lot of hackers and illegal stuff lurking around there. And not to mention that there might be Black Shadow informers on the dark web watching for anyone suspecting their whereabouts, Kim replied. I hadn't thought about that until you brought up the dark web hackers. Yeah, that's a possibility, Wade said. But I've got plenty of protection software on my computers, so I should be fine. I'll do research on the dark web info for any of this Ridley Farkas, and if I find anything, I'll let you two know. Thanks, Wade, Ron said with a happy smile. I wonder if Dr. Director will have any luck finding info on Ridley, too. Actually, I informed her about everything I had just told you and Kim. She was a bit unnerved by the whole thing of me getting involved in the matter, but since Betty knows that I'm part of Team Possible, she's agreed to let me help you out on the investigation of the Black Shadow organization, Wade replied. That's really sweet. And really swell, too, Ron said happily. With your help, finding the Black Shadow will be much easier. Don't get too excited, Wade replied with a smirk. Finding his organization isn't going to be a walk in the park. It's going to take time and patience. He's got a point there, Ron. Ridley seems to have covered his tracks really well, so it may take some time to find anything on him, Kim pointed out. I know that, Ron replied. I'm just hoping we find his crime boss and his organization before he causes any more harm. Same here, Wade agreed. I'd better get going now and start searching any info on this guy. I'll let you know if I find something important. Wade then signed off, leaving Kim, Ron, and Rufus alone once more. Meanwhile, in the slums of Middleton, 15 sinister-looking thugs were hard at work. An abandoned freight train yard, loading dozens and dozens of crack and cocaine filled with crates. Aboard the unmarked big rig truck from inside the old freight car, their leader was a dangerous drug lord named Miguel Diaz, one of the most crime bosses in Middleton. He had secretly been supplying enormous amounts of drugs from the Black Shadow organization 5 weeks ago and was expected to pay Ridley back for them by last Friday. Yet Diaz had already secretly planned to flee Middleton once he made his funnel drug in there. While Diaz was a wealthy crook, he had no way of possibly be able to pay Ridley back the amount of money he had owed by supplying them with drugs. He had fallen behind on his payments and still owed over $5 million to the Black Shadow organization. Yet Diaz knew that he wouldn't be allowed to make his ends meet, so fleeing was his own plan of action. Yo, boss, we got the last 2 crates loaded up, the drug dealer reported to Diaz. Good, the drug lord replied. Tell our other men to load up their trucks and move out. The drug traffickers prepared to move out. A large missile suddenly struck the big rig full of drugs and exploded, destroying the entire vehicle, killing a large amount of crooks inside the range. Diaz was thrown off a block several feet into a nearby dumpster. until he saw something large, descending to the ground of what remained to be a burning big rig. It would look like an enormous robot, painted red and purple, standing about maybe 5 times the size of a human. Its head resembled into something of an ant or a roach, within a couple metal spikes on the top. The robot had a large claw on one end of its arm, and the right one had a large chainsaw at the end. And just above the arm was a flamethrower. The robot used to torch several of the drug dealers and open fire on it. Diaz had already heard a moan behind him, and he looked over behind him just to remember who laying him close was a large pool of blood. His legs had been blown off from the explosion, and he was at the verge of death. Diaz's eyes widened in horror as he grabbed his injured comrade just as we went limp. "No, brother!" Diaz yelled in both sorrow and rage. He angrily grabbed his own handgun out of his belt and shot several shots at the robot's massive head, aiming for its glowing purple eyes. "You bastard!" Diaz roared angrily. The massive robot turned towards Diaz, letting out a mechanical hiss at him. "You dare raise your hand against me, Miguel Diaz?" The robot sneered in a sinister, maniacal male voice. The voice was imitated with a deep, out-of-breath baritone to it. Diaz then backed away from it and quickly rushed over to the other trucks nearby and saw an RPG launcher inside. He grabbed it and aimed it at the robot. "You killed my brother, you damn piece of junk metal!" Diaz roared, firing a rocket at the robot. It raised its chainsaw and quickly fired several large nails out of the small gun chamber under the chainsaw, striking the rocket and blowing it up. The robot suddenly charged at Diaz. Raising its large claw, Diaz began to panic and running away, towards one of the trucks, but the robot was much more faster and eventually grabbed him. Diaz struggled and screamed as he tried breaking free, but the massive machine was far stronger, so his struggling was in vain. The large, frantic beast lifted up Diaz with its metal head and its shoulders. "Let me go, you vile piece of scrap metal! You have no idea who the hell you're messing with!" Diaz roared angrily. "You are in no position to make demands, Diaz," the robot replied. "You owe my organization a lot of money, and yet you try to bail on me. That's going to cause you something serious, and I think I know how you can repay me." Diaz then watched in horror as the robot lifted his chainsaw arm towards him. It roared loudly like a motorcycle engine, and the robot completely proceeded to saw off the drug lord's legs above the knees. Diaz screamed in absolute agony as both of his legs went severed from his body. Blood splattered all over the robot's head and chest, as then it dropped Diaz to the ground. He was still screaming and sobbing in agony. The robot wasn't completely finished with Diaz yet. He raised his chainsaw arm and fired several pencil-sized nails into Diaz's arms and chest, puncturing his lung and vital organs. The drug lord then began coughing out large amounts of blood from his mouth as he began to grow weaker from the extreme blood loss. Due to this severed legs, as Diaz grew dizzy and his vision faded, he saw the large robot kneel down, and its head slowly let up a loud hiss. Once it was completely opened, Diaz was shocked to see the face of none other than Ridley Farkas underneath the robot's head. He was sneering sadistically at the dying drug lord. "Farkas," Diaz rasped weakly. "It's such a shame that I had to end like this, my friend. You were quite powerful and allied to me and my organization. But now I can't have anyone just taking my hard-earned cash for granted without paying me back, can I?" Ridley mocked coldly with a sneer. Diaz was far too weak from his injuries from the blood loss at this point, and without his legs, escape was impossible. He could only drag himself across the ground with his bare hands. But when the pain of the injuries inflicted on him was too severe, Diaz could hardly move at all. I was gonna get it," the drug lord rasped in a weak voice. "Don't lie to me, you bastard," Ridley sneered, firing several more nails at Diaz, hitting the bloody stumps of where his legs were. "You were trying to run away, weren't you? I saw you clearing out your hideout here, so don't play that frickin' game with me, and I'm getting you what you owe me. And if you can't pay back your cash, you'll have to pay it back with your life." Ridley's helmet then slammed hard shut as he raised the chainsaw above Diaz, who was now drying like crazy, desperate to get away from despite his injuries. However, Ridley blasted him with his flamethrower and sent him to a blaze. Diaz screamed in agony as he slowly burned alive, flailing around on the ground and trying to put himself out. But with no luck, he eventually stopped moving and went silent after he was burning alive for several minutes. Upon seeing their boss being murdered by Ridley, the remaining drug dealers remained open fire on him with the angry and vengeful shouting. Ridley quickly spun around and blasted them with his flamethrower, killing a large amount of them. A small door then slid open in the back and the Mechanica suit, and several launchers rose out of the openings. Ridley then fired off at several of the other trucks, destroying them and killing more drug dealers. Soon there was only just a few of them remaining. Seeing how Ridley got his mecha suit was far too powerful for them, and the remaining drug dealers had attempted to flee from the scene, but Ridley was too fast for them. He gunned down them with the nail gun built into his chainsaw, killing the rest of them. As Ridley gazed over the destruction around him, he felt an enormous sense of pride and joy all over what he'd done. Not only that he wiped out the entire game of drug dealers, but in addition to that, a few trucks filled with drugs and weapons had been spared from Ridley's onslaught. This meant he could now help himself to the spoils of hard labor. The spoils of war, Ridley says, as he approached one of the big rig trucks with its ripped trailer door open. And it's even better than I thought. Inside the truck trailer were several and dozens of boxes containing drugs, weapons, and even large wads of cash. Ridley sneered behind his suit and helmet and approached it, opening it with several compartments in the suit, such as stuffing as much cash in them as they could. Ridley even realized that he just needed to get the rest of it back to the hideout, since there was just too much for him to carry alone. He radioed Faust and his suit built-in communicator and informed them that he just scored a huge hit down at the abandoned freight train loading yards in downtown Lowerton, and that he would need some assistance in bringing the rest back to his HQ. I'll send some of our members down to assist you. I should warn you, though, that the police are headed in your direction. The citizens might have heard the commotion down there and will report it to the cops, Faust informed. Well, shit, Ridley cursed in frustration. I had a feeling that may happen. How many? How many what, my lord? Faust questioned in confusion. Are you stupid? I'm asking how many cop cars are there, Ridley snapped impatiently. Traffic cameras? I hacked down about 5 of them heading your direction. They'll reach your freight train yard in about 15 minutes, Faust replied. That shouldn't be a problem, Ridley said. My mecha suit has a few special features that could help with that. Best of luck then, my lord, Faust replied. I'll send help over your location right away out. Faust out. Ridley then tapped on the button on his small suit at the door of the chest area, and the unit opened up. A large wasp-shaped drones flew out of them, and then they opened in the direction of the opening of oncoming cars. Ridley commanded them to disable the cop cars and eliminate any threats attempting to reach his location. He set his eyes back at the hoard of the drugs, cash, and weapons. Meanwhile, back in Middleton, Kim and Ron were currently headed back to their houses. In Kim's coupe, when her communicator beeped, it was Wade. Hey Wade, what's going on? Kim asked. Bad news, Kim. I intercepted a police radio broadcast downtown Lowerton, reporting an incident going on in an abandoned freight train yard, about maybe 2 blocks away from them, Wade explained. An incident? Do you think it might be some of our old enemies up to no good? Ron wondered. It can't be Draken or Shigo. They've retired from being villains, Kim reminded him. I know that, but there's other ones like Motor Ed and Dan Amy, Ron speculated. I have no info of who's behind it, but the cops want you to investigate the freight train yard and see what's going on, Wade informed. Alright, send us the coordinates and we'll head down there, Kim said. I've sent them both to your communicators. You should be set, Wade replied. Thanks, Wade, Kim replied. Then she signed off. You think that maybe Black Shadow has something to do with this? Ron asked. I'm not sure, Kim replied unsurely, but either way, we better get down there. The 2 unmarked vans had arrived to assist Ridley in transporting the remaining drugs, weapons, and cash to the Black Shadow Fortress. Once they pulled up next to the truck Ridley stood next to, several masked men got out and saluted to their leader. Lord Ridley, we've arrived as ordered, the truck driver of one of the vans said. Good, Ridley said, as he masked his robotic voice. Load them all to the big rig trailers into the vans. Then get out of here as quickly as you can. My drones are holding up the cops back, but they won't keep them held back forever. Yes, my lord, the driver nodded, then ordered his assistants to carry out Ridley's orders. As the Black Shadow agents lowered the weapons, drugs, and cash into their vans, Kim and Ron were currently entering downtown Lowerton, about 10 blocks away, unaware of Ridley's Wasp drones watching the area from high above. They had already wiped out the cop cars, headed down towards the abandoned freight train yards, and were currently on the lookout for any other threats nearby. The drones were equipped with high-powered lasers and EMP guns, making them dangerous adversaries. Once Kim and Ron got closer to the freight train yard, they noticed smoke nearby. It looks like there's a fire up ahead, Ron said in concern. As their car got closer to the source of the smoke, Kim and Ron felt their hearts jump when they saw who it was. 5 police cars were on fire, and a few of them had crashed into several other nearby parked cars. Luckily, no one was in them, but it was clear that the officers didn't survive. Oh my God! What happened here? Kim exclaimed in shock. I don't know, Ron replied. If I had to guess, it looks as if those police cars might have been chasing someone and crashed. Wade then said there was an incident down here in the abandoned freight train yards, but he wasn't told what this was. We're pretty close to it, so maybe whatever's down here had something to do with this, Kim suggested. It's possible, Ron agreed. I have a feeling we're in for a fight once we get to the freight train yards. So do I, Kim replied worriedly. We better be careful once we arrive there. Once they arrived at the last block where the freight train yards were, several unmarked vans suddenly sped out of the freight train yards, almost striking Kim's coupe. Whoa, what seems to be in a hurry? Ron exclaimed. Something's going on here, Kim realized, upon seeing the backs of the vans. Those vans have no license plates on them, and their windows are illegally tinted. I think we might be dealing with some thieves, human traffickers, or possibly even drug dealers. If that's the case, we better call for backup, Ron advised. Let's see what we're up against first, Kim suggested, as they pulled into the freight train yards. Dozens and dozens of abandoned freight train cars and oil tank cars could be seen parked on various abandoned train tracks. But it wasn't all Kim and Ron saw. They saw several smoking burnt skeletons of what used to be big rig trailers, and dozens of dead bodies could also be seen near them. This doesn't look good, KP. I think that part you said about drug dealers might be true, Ron said in a nervous tone. We better park here right behind one of our freight cars. I have a feeling that whoever did this is still here, Kim replied, moving her car behind a large truck oil tank car to avoid being seen by anyone else who might be there. Unknown to them at the moment, Ridley was currently standing guard at one of the remaining big rig trailers, the last transportation vehicle left in the area, in his mechanic suit, making sure that no one spied on him, since he was further within the freight train yards. Ridley hadn't noticed Kim Possible's car entering the place, but his suit sensors had picked up several heat signatures nearby. Ridley noticed that 2 of them were human, and he tried to hide, and the third one was identified as a rodent. Immediately upon them heading towards his direction, Ridley could then tell they truly wasn't one of his men. Leading up to him to realize there were 3 identified individuals that somehow managed to sneak in unnoticed. What is it? Intruders? Ridley said aloud, spinning around in the direction of the 3 intruders that snuck in. A bunch of boxcars blocked by Ridley's view. He couldn't see them, but his heat sensor vision showed that they were pretty much right behind the boxcars. Ridley then raised his suit with a claw hand, and even a smaller missile launchers built into it. Then several rockets in the boxcars, blowing them into pieces. Kim and Ron quickly jumped out of the way of the explosion as the shards of wood and metal rained down around them. Rufus clung tightly inside of Ron's pockets to avoid being flamed out. As Ron rolled across the ground, Kim and Ron crawled underneath to a nearby freight car, trying to find out what that attack came from. You can't hide from me, intruders! Ridley yelled out. Kim and Ron felt their hearts jump upon hearing that robotic male voice. When Kim turned her head towards the direction of the voice, she saw a huge robotic mech standing near a large freight car filled with illegal items. It was 5 times the size of a human being. It was also heavily armed. Wow, holy cow, is that a robot? Ron exclaimed upon seeing the large robot. I don't think that's a robot, Kim replied. I think it's someone in the battle mech. That male voice, it sounds like it's masked. Robots don't have masked voices. If that's the case, who do you think it is? Ron asked. No idea, Kim replied, but either way, he needs to be stopped. What? How could we fight something like that? Ron replied, glanced over at the large robotic mech. I don't know exactly, Kim replied. That is really big, and it's heavily armed, not to mention that huge chainsaw on its one arm. Ron glanced over at the massive chainsaw arm on the robot mech as it cringed. He was pretty sure that it would take a huge machine with his mystical monkey powers, but one wrong move could mean getting sliced in half. Ron glanced up at the robots and then the box cars around it, forming a plan. I got a plan to take this metal freak down, KP, Ron said softly. What's the plan? Kim asked. As Ron whispered the plan to Kim, Ridley continued to look for the area for any sign of them. He kicked over a nearby freight train car, blasted the other 2 once with pieces with his missile launcher. I know you're still here. My sensors detect your presence, Ridley called out. I will find you, and you'll regret ever messing with me. Once Ron declared the rest of the plan to Kim, she nodded and said, This might work. I'll try and distract him, and you take it from there. With pleasure, Ron smirked, then watched as Kim crawled underneath from the freight car and pulled her unrappling gun from her belt. Kim fired it up in the nearby loading crane, hoisted herself up into another freight car, catching Ridley's attention. Hey, metal freak, over here! Kim called out in a sassy voice. At that moment, Ridley spotted Kim standing on top of the freight car. He sneered under his suit helmet. Well, Kim Possible, Ridley said in a sinister tone. I had a feeling that you and your boyfriend were the ones that the cops would send as backup. Unfortunately for you, I can't have you standing in my way, so this is where you two meet your end. I don't think so, Kim shot back bravely. I don't know who you are, and you're going to pay for what you have done here. Oh, so I'm offended, Ridley mocked, then slowly raised his chainsaw arm. Not! Kim quickly fired her grappling gun at the crane again, and as Ridley blasted his flamethrower at her. Luckily, Kim just got out of the way, just as the flames tortured the boxcar. Ridley jumped into a larger freight car and began to charge down towards Kim, but he was suddenly kicked off by Ron Stoppable, using his mystical monkey powers to strengthen his kick. Ridley hasn't been expecting this, so he was caught off guard and had thrown down onto the ground as Ron touched down a few feet away from him. Don't think I'm gonna go that easy on you, robot brain, Ron marked with a smirk. Ron Stoppable, Ridley growled. Brilliant but foolish. Ridley got back up to his feet and glared at Ron through his visor. The only fool I see is you, Rust Brain, Ron smirked, in a smug tone, taking a defensive stance. You may just think you're all tough in that spacesuit of yours, but you're facing a mystical master of mystical monkey powers. Ridley was rather impressed by Ron's sarcasm. He knew for a fact that Ron had no idea who exactly he and Kim were dealing with. Ridley considered telling them who he was, but quickly decided against it. He didn't want to reveal who he was, at least not yet. If they do find out who I am, I might spoil my plans for my downfall future, Ridley thought as he prepared to charge Ron. I don't want to kill them yet either, though that doesn't mean I can't at least send these fools a message to their fully challenge me. Ron charged at Ridley much faster than he could before, but Ridley had managed to somersault through out of the way and trip him over with his claw arm. Ridley then grabbed Ron by both of his legs and lifted him up from the ground, glaring at him through the visor with a serious look. Don't you think you understand just who the hell you have crossed 2 swords with, boy? Ridley snarled, then violently swung Ron around and slammed him hard against a nearby freight car, knocking the wind out of him. As Ron fell to the ground, struggling to catch his breath after taking such a powerful blow, but Ridley kicked him hard across the ground where he flew between 2 other freight cars, and then landed on a dried-up mud puddle. Rufus luckily wasn't hurt. but he slightly got shooken up by the hit. "Ron!" Kim yelled in shock at top from the crane. "So you think you're so tough with those powers that you're unstoppable? Well, I'm sorry to say that you would be more wrong," Ridley continued from the other side of the freight car. "I know more about you two than you could possibly understand." "Oh, really? Is that supposed to scare me and Kim?" "You're not the first one to tell us that," Ron replied with a big smug of tone of his. "You should be scared, boy," Ridley hissed coldly. "Because I also know about your families, friends, and relatives as well, and I have so many ways I could silence them." Ron felt slightly imitated, and so did Kim upon hearing that. But they weren't convinced. Yeah, right," Ron snapped. "You don't scare us that easily." "Oh, really? You act as if you understand me. But I can tell you both right now that you have no idea how much powerful I truly wield. So I may as well enlighten you both," Ridley mocked coldly, then glanced up at the Kim on the crane. "I wonder what James Possible and Ann Possible would think of it if you never returned home from here. Those you two pathetic brat brothers of yours, Jim and Tim Carever." Kim felt her heart skip a beat at the moment with the mecha suit thug mentioning the names of her family. How did he knew who they were? Ron was equally shocked as well. "Well, what the hell? How do you know my family?" "Or her family?" Ron demanded, lowing, feeling less confident than before. "I just don't know them, Stoppable." "I know about your family as well," Ridley continued. "Tell me how's your sweet sister Hannah doing? Or how about that female ninja friend of yours named Yori? I wondered how she would flare in a fight against me." Ron was now starting to even panic at this point. Whoever this man in this mecha suit clearly was, knew far more about him and Kim than he understood. Ron wondered just how that was even possible. But the answer quickly hit him like a brick wall, and he thought about what Gemini revealed to Betty Director. You're messing with the Black Shadow organization, are you?" Ron realized in shock. "Well, now you're quick to catch on," Ridley sneered. "You are really more intelligent than some people that they take for you. Very few knows about the Black Shadow, but yet I'm not supposed to be giving out my master knows not to uncover his tracks very well. I take it Gemini had something to do with it, to both of you, am I right?" Ron and Kim felt their blood run cold in fear upon hearing that mystery man in the mecha suit's confusion. Not only he was a member of the wall of the hidden Black Shadow organization, but he clearly knew that Ridley had something he just mentioned to him. What Kim and Ron don't know, however, was Ridley was standing right in front of him, hidden behind a small metal machine which he had used to see his true self. "Is your master Ridley Farkas?" Kim questioned in the harsh tone. "Indeed he is," Ridley replied, smirking under his mask. "I can tell you that you're eager to find him, but I promise that won't ever happen. He has his ways of ensuring his autonomy, and that is by silencing anyone who dares to stick their noses where it doesn't belong." "How the hell do you know what Gemini said? You know nothing," Ron replied. And he snapped. "That's where you're wrong, Stoppable," Ridley shot back aggressively. "You have no idea how powerful the Black Shadow truly is, nor what my boss is truly capable of. He could easily silence you and those you love, and no one would ever know who the culprits are. Duff and Dementor face the same fate, and no one knows who the killer is as well. Well, for except a pest that couldn't just keep his mouth shut. But he'll be dealt with in true time."